So welcome everyone. I'm Hannah from the Bangor Public Library. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us today, especially our three panelists. This program is part of a series that we do in conjunction with SCORE on all sorts of different topics related to small business ownership. And we're really excited to have our guests today to speak about running a food business. So I will hand it over to David Green from SCORE to tell a little bit more about their organization and introduce today's panelists.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. I'm David Green, as Hannah said. I'm the chapter chair for SCORE in Northern Maine, which covers about 6 counties, from mid-coast to up and east to west. So a big territory. SCORE's mission, as some of you will probably know, is to foster vibrant small business communities through mentoring and education. And our annual report came out recently. We're particularly proud of the fact that SCORE Maine was #1 in the nation for client impact. So we're all still over the moon about that clients like what we're doing. We have about 25 mentors and subject matter experts in Northern Maine, of which Keith, who we'll hear about in a few minutes, is one. Mainly what we do in SCORE is mentoring small businesses, and it's education. And this is part of our education outreach, where we have one of the most successful outreach programs. And it's really because of 3 people. Hannah in the public library, Donna Cassesi, who organizes the speakers, and she's kind of vice chair for SCORE in Northern Maine, and Dan Reed, who does the marketing for us. So the team together works very well, and we've had some tremendous support for the programs that we've been doing. For mentoring, which is what SCORE is most known for, to clients, it's free, it's confidential, and there are no limits on the number of sessions you can have. So we have 3 panelists. I'll just introduce them briefly, then allow them to introduce themselves in a little bit more depth. But the first is Amanda Gaudet. She's the owner of Flipside Coffee in Thomaston. If you want to wave, Amanda, that'd be great, so we can see who you are. Second is Keith Manaker, who owns Harvest Moon Deli in a number of locations. And I best know Keith. He's a subject matter expert for SCORE, but there is a Harvest Moon Deli about half a mile from where I live. And when we're too lazy to fix dinner, that's where we go, always Harvest Moon. And then Gabriela Acero, she owns the Wolf Peach restaurant in Camden. And before we allow them to introduce themselves, the instructions that Donna Cassesi, who set this up, said, tell us about 3 things you wish you'd known when you're setting up a business. And in our kind of preamble here, Gabriela went through 10. So we won't be limited to 3. It'll be however many we can get in the hour or so that we have together. So let's let Amanda, Keith, and Gabriela introduce themselves in a little more depth, and then we'll get into the questions. And then we'll have time at the end for question and answer from the audience. So let's start off with Amanda.
Hi, thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and chat with everyone. I'm Amanda Gaudet. My husband and I opened up Flipside Coffee in Thomaston, Maine, about 3.5 years ago. We opened it in December of 2019. It was 3 months to the day before we had to close for COVID. So I wish I had known there was a pandemic coming, but that's, couldn't have done that. So we call ourselves a small but mighty coffee shop. We have about 20 seats in our coffee shop, or 20 to 40 seats, depending on the season. We have a full breakfast and lunch menu that we serve. We also have grab and go, and we employ about 7 to 10 employees throughout the year. And what we really do is, when we think about our business, we're really proud of the food that we do. We're really proud of the coffee espresso drinks and everything, and also the value that we bring to the community. And it's just been such a supportive community that we're in. And I think that's really the reason why we were able to make it through COVID, having been open for such a short time before that all happened. But when we think about our business and our original vision, it's really about the experience that we're providing for the people that come in to the shop. That's when I think about it, that's what we're selling. It's, it starts with us and our employees, and thinking about, we try to create a really positive culture within our team, and really focus on teamwork, and then have that trickle out to the customers, so that everybody who walks in the door feels good walking in, feels invited, and then when they leave, they feel even better because they've gotten something delicious, and just a good conversation with maybe a barista, or just seeing someone that they know and getting to chat. And that's really our focus as a business. I opened it with so my husband and I opened it. It was just the two of us right at the beginning, and it's hard to think about. It's such a blur what's happened since then. But yeah, right now we have 10 employees, and we just grew pretty fast, and it's been going very well. We've built a really great local following, and of course, the seasonal crowd it helps. We absolutely need that, but we were always focused on being here for our community, and I think that's really helped us too. So we are open year round, 7 days a week, which is a whole thing unto itself. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else, but that's us.
Thanks, Keith.
Hello, my name is Keith Manaker, and I own 2 restaurant concepts, or I'm a partner in 2 restaurant concepts. One is called Harvest Moon Deli, and David, thank you for those nice compliments about what we're doing. Harvest Moon Deli is a quick service, casual panini shop mostly. So we specialize in doing paninis and soup and salad, and it's a counter service concept. We started the first one about 15 years ago, and we opened our 7th location last October in Waterville, and we're still hoping to expand this summer as well, and maybe get down to Augusta. And my other concept is also what we would call quick service casual, which means counter service, no wait staff. That's a taco place that we opened up over in Orono, Maine, called Tacorita. And we opened that just like you, Amanda. I think we opened October, and then COVID hit in March. So we were still getting our feet under us with that one. And as much as I thought I knew about the restaurant business, having already owned 6 restaurants and been running them for almost 15 years, I definitely learned a lot on that second go around as well. So anyway, that's my basics. I have a background in business degree, and I also have a culinary arts degree, and I've also spent most of my life up till now working in and around restaurants. Yeah.
Thanks, Keith. Gabriela?
Hi, everyone. So I think maybe I'll start a little bit. I have kind of a slightly different thing, because we actually decided to open the restaurant because of the pandemic, which is kind of a very different tact from everybody. So I grew up in Waterville and left to go to college, and then landed in New York. And I had grown up working in restaurants. My first job was Buen Appetito, which is still open in Waterville. I started there when I was 15. Absolutely loved it. Food and hosting has always been a big part of my family. So it was a very familiar thing. And I quickly kind of jumped ship from a more, what maybe would be considered a more traditional path, working in an office, and got back into restaurants in New York City, and lived and worked there in restaurants in the industry for about 10 years, before moving back to Maine in 2019, which is where I met my now fiance and business partner. And it was really, I originally did not have any interest in owning my own business. I am very good at executing other people's visions. That's kind of what I have done, especially the last couple of years I was in New York. I was doing mostly consulting and helping businesses open and get off the ground, and or pivot, reconceptualize. But I don't know, I just wasn't particularly interested in doing my own thing. And then when the pandemic hit, for me, that was a big, and excuse the phrase, a kind of come to Jesus moment of we've got some major issues in our industry. We've got some major things that we need to reevaluate. And I saw it as a really interesting opportunity to, given that I was lucky enough to be safe during the pandemic and have that be a time that I could spend thinking about this stuff. We wanted to try to see how could we build a restaurant model that was different. And so when we set out to build Wolf Peach, we wanted to focus only on local ingredients. So we weren't to the point of using no lemons, no olive oil. I mean, we were taking it almost to the extreme so that we could really help people kind of reconnect with their own communities, their own food systems in their backyard, understand what is easily at hand when we live in such a globalized world. And then also doing no tipping, which for us was very important. I think tip structure has a lot of problematic history that a lot of folks don't remember. And the fact that the whole tax structure and financial reality of the way restaurants work is kind of wedded to this very particular, very antiquated system, I find to be really problematic. And so we wanted to see, could we make it work doing something different? And so we set out to do that. So my partner and I moved out to Camden, where we now are from Western Maine. In September of 2020, we bought what was the Drouthy Bear and worked on the space ourselves. We have no outside investors. We did not do traditional fundraising or any of those types of things with regard to having structural assistance. We really did it all ourselves. And so we were renovating the space. And then the following spring, we opened a very casual pop-up. I think a lot of folks think we don't have a plan because we've kind of pivoted so often. But for us, I mean, we were in the middle of a pandemic. And so we were just trying to be very attentive and reactionary to what we could do, what the landscape looked like, what people's needs were. And so we started similar to Flipside, just the two of us. As more of a takeout, outdoor only concept. And we did barbecue 2 days a week and pizza 1 day a week, and just backyard, awesome, easy peasy. And then we ended up running that through the summer and then opened the full scale restaurant, and now up to about 10 employees as well in December of that year. And we ran that first concept, which was a little bit more fine dining, very focused, very structured for the first year. And it was incredible. And it was also incredibly difficult. And we were lucky enough to get some really wonderful praise. We were nominated for a James Beard Award. And then we looked at each other and we said, we don't want to do this anymore. This isn't feeding us in the way we thought. This isn't being received in the way we thought. It became this kind of very precious kind of fine dining thing. And we felt like we were losing sight of the point, which was, the no tipping and high wage for all of our employees. We only are open 4 days a week. We want work-life balance, and also the highlighting of local accessible food. And we kind of had to be, because we were doing no tipping, we had to be at this higher price point, and it changed the way we were perceived. And we said, okay, that wasn't the goal. And so we reevaluated and we went back to a much more casual, naturally leavened pizza concept. We loosened our restrictions on the local. So, I mean, we still prioritize local. My beverage program is 85% local wine, cider, beer. And then we have a few things from away that are a bit lower in price. We softened the tip rules, and I think that's kind of one of the things I'll be talking about is the ability to and willingness to pivot. So here we are, and we're heading into our first summer as this concept. So I feel like I've owned 15 restaurants in the last 2 years, and very excited to share all the things I've learned. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'd like to, looking at the three things you wish you knew before you started, you've probably covered some of them. But let's go through, Amanda first, and then Keith, and then Gabriela. But I've got a feeling you're going to kind of build on each other. So that's a loose structure. if you want to jump in when you have something to say, feel free, and we'll try and balance the time together. So let's go with you, Amanda, first.
Okay, sure. It was really nice to hear about both Keith and Gabriela about your kind of stories as well. I'm excited to learn more about that too. So I feel like, unlike Gabriela, I feel like we actually, I'll tell a little bit more about our story, but we didn't really have a business plan when we started. And so Neil and I also kind of grew up in the restaurant industry, my husband and we met both working at a place. And he had managed a bunch of different restaurants around Boston. That's where we're from originally. And I had served and bartended and worked in coffee shops and all that stuff throughout my life, along with another career that I had as well. But I think my first thing I'll say, I guess I'll start with the fact that we moved to Thomaston, where like right down the street from where the shop is. And when we moved into town, we were working on a house, and we're going to the local coffee shop every day. And then one day we got to know the owner, and one day she decided to close and just put a sign up that said cafe for lease. And Neil and I had talked about owning throughout our time together, we'd always talk about, oh, we should own, maybe a bar or something at some point in our life, probably like way down, much later. And then we were at this point in our lives where we were both in kind of transition from different jobs. And I kind of saw this sign and I came home and I said, Neil, it's, this cafe's for lease. Should we just do this? And he said, maybe we should, which is one way to start a business. So that was like in September or October, and we ended up opening in December. So it was a very short period of time between when we decided and then took it on. And we were able to do that because we got to walk into a shop that was already set up. The equipment that was there was part of our lease. So it took very little starting capital to get going. We did have a little bit of money cashed out in retirement funds, things like that. But so when we started, because we had so little money, and the only way that we could do it was with so little need for startup capital, we also didn't take any financing, except that we financed our one big asset, which is our espresso machine. But other than that, we didn't take any capital from anywhere, which is a great thing to be able to walk in and say that. The flip side of that, I didn't mean to say it like that, no pun intended, was that we did not anticipate the amount of cash we needed in reserves just thinking about cash flow. And these were all like starting a business. I'm also the type of person where I'm happy to work for other people. I never really thought about myself as an entrepreneur. My husband is kind of the opposite, and we work well together like that. And he also had all the experience of running restaurants, but we were just kind of like tumbling into it. So then COVID hit. And the reality is, I think that even if COVID hadn't hit, we would have hit trouble really quickly, because we did not have just the basic operating expenses in the bank to make it 3 or 6 months that you needed to make it. And the only reason why we kind of made it through COVID was we didn't qualify for PPP, or at least the first round of PPP loans, because we were so new and didn't have many employees. And we were able to get a loan through Community Concepts, which is, if anyone is thinking about starting a business or doesn't know about Community Concepts, it's I don't know if they're technically, I think they're a community development corporation in Maine, and they're really wonderful there. They have a lot of resources to help out small businesses and kind of alternative style of loans. So that honestly, without that loan, we were able to get that, probably 6 to 9 months after COVID kind of hit. And without that, I don't believe we would have made it. And especially the thing of being in a seasonal area. And we have, over the years now, we've built up a nice buffer that it's still hard being with the ups and downs of the seasonal times, but sitting in the red in January and February and March and watching every day, looking at your bank account and just worried about payroll and all those things, like it's real. And I think that we would have really struggled a lot more had we not gotten that, even though that was a small loan, but it really helped us through that. So that was something And now, like, we've really, after having a strong year, a somewhat strong year last year, we're able to have about 6 months of operating expenses in reserves. And it's just the amount of emotional stress that takes off is really priceless. So that's a big piece, which is a very basic business concept, and yet it just didn't happen. And another basic business concept is we had a really strong vision of certain things about the type of the feel. Again, like I said, like, I think what we're selling is an experience, and we had a really strong vision that was based on the restaurant that we met. And it was this very small restaurant group, a family restaurant group in Boston, that we worked together. He managed, I bartended at this one place, and then Neil went off to become the general manager of one of their other restaurants. But it was, again, a place where you walk in, it's from the ownership down. It felt good to be there. And so we had such a strong vision of recreating that type of culture, and the culture that we felt working within this environment, and the way that people treated each other, and the way they just felt about being in that building. From the beginning, we knew that was what we wanted to create. And I feel like that's been something that vision has really pushed us through a lot of decision making, which has been great and helpful. And I think we've stuck with it the entire time, and maybe stumbled here and there, but we kind of bring a lot of our decisions back to that vision. What we didn't have, though, was short and long-term plans about what we actually wanted the business to be. And I think that again, we were able to make it work because I think we have complementary skill sets. We were working together. And but for example, we're a coffee shop, and people walk in and they see the extent of our menu, and they're surprised at the food offerings that we have for a coffee shop. And it was like a couple years in where I woke up one day and I was like, oh my God, I'm running a restaurant. I didn't realize that we were running a restaurant. That's what it feels like. That's kind of what we've been doing. And we kind of had to scale back a little bit and think, like, what do we actually want this business to be? And when we actually went for that community concepts loan, was the first time we put together a business plan. We had to do it for that. And it was an extremely helpful exercise, especially after we've been open and with COVID and pivoting through all of that. I think that really helped us. And then we had to kind of ask ourselves, do we want to be a coffee shop? And if so, every single decision we make, we have to go back to that question. Is this what a coffee shop or our coffee shop does? Or do we want to be a cafe restaurant or something different? And I think we've really gotten better at kind of trying to define for ourselves. We're not great. We're still working on all of this always, but thinking about that. But I think prior to opening, it's hard to think about it, though, at least in my mind. I mean, I'm a parent of young kids, and I think a lot about, it's a lot like parenting, where people can tell you everything about it. People have gone through it. They can tell you, but you don't know until you're actually in it what it's like. And you also don't know your capacity to do whatever it takes to make it work, which is an incredible feeling. And there's a lot of sacrifice involved too, but I think, like, I don't know. I think that if I could go back, I think if we could have sat down with someone who could help us work through building these things out and being a little bit clearer about the more concrete aspects, I think it would have saved us from a lot of things. Granted, then there was the pandemic, so everything was up in the air, but that's one thing. And then the last thing I was going to say, there's two things, but I think that they're like two sides to one coin. One is that I wish I had trusted my instincts a lot more from the beginning. And I think, especially as a woman, I think it's a struggle for a lot of women. I think, as a people pleaser and things like that. I have very strong instincts, especially when things don't feel right. And sometimes I think of, well, maybe if only we do this or that, or if this person, and about all different aspects of the business. And when it comes to personnel and employee issues and just big decisions and things like that. And so I think I've been learning and really practicing trying to trust my instincts quicker, so I can make decisions much quicker when I know in my gut that this is working or this isn't working. And on the other side of that, though, is also, I'm a very collaborative person. I like to draw. I like to really, what's the word? I work with my employees a lot because I want them to also feel a part of the creative process and feel some sort of ownership in what we're trying to do. So I really do talk to them a lot about big decisions and try to get input from them as well before making any big decision. But I also think that from the beginning, and it would have been difficult to do this, but as quickly as possible to bring on people who have complementary skills and can do the things better than I can do. Because you kind of have to get over yourself. Like I'm a control freak. I kind of want to be able to do everything. Even though I'm not going to do everything, I want to be able to do everything really well and be great at it all. But it doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense for running a business. And so Neil and I were both front of house people. And I had done minor prep and working at a bagel shop and a sandwich shop and done kind of sandwich line work, but not real kitchen line work. And so we just kind of like bumbled for the first 6 months or so, just trying to like hold it together. It's really funny. And we're good at the menu creation piece, but the whole working the line is a different thing. And because of COVID, I had worked at a restaurant for a few seasons up here, and I never would have been able to get any of the people from there to come work for me. There were only kind of people in the industry up here that I knew. But because of COVID and people's lives changed, I was able to capitalize a bit and get one person who was a friend of mine who basically was working in a kitchen since she was 14 and really understood how to run a kitchen. Even though she didn't want to do that, she was really happy to come on and help us learn those things. And she said she's willing to stay for a very short period of time. She's still with us. And I just think about, I don't think we would have made it without having that type of expertise and help in thinking about all the different pieces with the kitchen. And another friend who has like a commercial kitchen in her home, and she did the baking for us. Even though I love baking, I wanted to do that. I realized really quickly I can't do all the things that I want to do and I love. So she was able to come in and do that. And I think now it's trying to figure out, how do I bring people on before I get to the point where it's a problem, and really try to build my business so that I have these people that can help me build a structure that makes more sense, where it's not dependent on me or Neil or any one person, that everyone's kind of filling this role and we can collaborate together. I know that was a little long-winded, but those are the things that I was thinking about from my perspective.
Great. Well, thank you, Amanda. Let's go to Keith. Keith next.
Got it. Okay, I just want to unmute. So I think it's interesting, Amanda. I'm sure I'm going to have some overlap with some of the things you said, but I'll also try to expound or offer my own personal take on some of these things. But I thought you said 300 things we wish we had known. My list is a little lengthy, but let's see. The first thing I had written down when I was thinking about this, and it's really great to think about these sort of things, is and I don't know if these are things I wish I had known, because I'd heard so much of this throughout my life. Just, you always hear these things, but I think I wish I'd had a better understanding of these, what really meant by this. So, we all hear you gotta have capital when you start a business. Capital. People are always talking about you gotta have capital. And I think I wish I had a better understanding of what exactly they meant and why capital is so important with a startup. I'll leave that open questions if people have it later, but capital is so important with a startup, and I wish I had a better understanding of what that means. Piggybacking on that, I also wish I had a better understanding of structuring debt and the importance of how debt is structured, and also financial statements. When it comes to debt in a restaurant, if you simply speaking, if you amortize over 3 years when you could have amortized over 7, that could be all the difference in the world. Or having an angel investor that's willing to amortize a great concept over 12 years so that you have cash flow during the beginning years. I mean, debt isn't always your enemy. And often it's just the way it's structured that can make all the difference in the world for a restaurant to either make money or not. And then, of course, a better understanding along that line with capital and understanding debt is an understanding of financial statements. I think it's absolutely crucial. A lot of business owners, I'm not a numbers person, I'm a people person. But if you own a business and you don't have a really sound understanding of financials and you don't keep very, very solid books, I think you're doing yourself a huge disservice. So I think that's another one that everyone should know up front, and something that you would wish you'd know later on if you'd known up front. So those are my first kind of three all around finances, I'd say, and that sort of thing. Second thing that I, wish I had known more about early on in my business life was the importance of all the partnerships in your life. And even if you don't have a business partner, if you have a life partner, if you have a spouse, financial partners, the people that finance your business, whether they're the bank or not, they're kind of partners in this with you. And you ought to choose the right one. Vendor partnerships. I don't really call them vendor relationships or vendor partnerships. When I work with PFG or Cisco or Dennis Foods or Pepsi or Coke, they're all partnerships in my business, and some are better partners than others for me. I think that's very important. And then all that being said, most importantly is if you have a business partner, something you want to, your best friend isn't always your best business partner. And often your spouse isn't your best business partner. Not that it isn't, but it isn't always. So I think if you're going to have whatever the partnerships you have and are going to have before you start your business, consider them very, very carefully and define them very, very carefully. The more you can define the partnership and what's expected of everybody and what compensation will be and all those important decisions, I wouldn't leave those up to chance. So that's my second point, is the importance of all the partnerships. And then the third thing that I really wish I knew just how important it is, especially early on, is, and again, you touched on this, Amanda, I think Gabriela already will, but knowing your identity and your goals, which are kind of similar, like who you are kind of sometimes defines what you want out of your business. So it's your restaurant identity and your restaurant goals. If you don't really know who or what your restaurant is, it's really hard to become what you want to be. So I'd say knowing your personal identity, your personal goals as well. I've come to find out that not everybody opens a restaurant just for money. Now, there's people that open restaurants because they really, truly just want to make great food. If they can make a little bit of money doing that, they're happy. Some people that just like the social idea of it, and money's not the main goal. It's a great place to spend time and entertain and be social and make some money. But if you know what your goal is, I mean, it's going to change how you operate your business and your personal life. So I think it's very important to think about it. Like it always seemed to me like, well, why else would I open any business ultimately except make money? But that's a different goal than trying to make a better community, for instance. They don't always go hand in hand. So I think it's really important to be honest with yourself and whoever you're in business with, and think about who you want to be. That's part of it, identity and goals. But then the other identity is, like Amanda was saying, if you're a coffee shop, a coffee shop. If you're a cafe, be a cafe. And if you're a Mexican restaurant, you probably don't want to throw hot dogs out there on the menu as much as possible. So you don't want to confuse people. So I think sometimes when people start getting into trouble, they throw everything they can against the wall, try to build sales instead of focusing on their core identity. So if you're a hamburger and hot dog place and you're not making it, I wouldn't suggest becoming an ice cream parlor. I'd suggest becoming a better hamburger and hot dog place. That's who you are. So those are my three items. I've got a long list of others, but hopefully that's helpful to start with.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Gabriela.
Okay, so I think rather than maybe throwing out totally separate things, because I think we've done a lot of overlapping already, but it feels great that we're all kind of thinking and talking about the same things. And I think we all kind of seem like we're talking about these things in slightly different ways. And I feel like that's really great. And that's really useful because it does demonstrate that there's a diversity of approaches and a diversity of ways of thinking about these things. So I just want to kind of go back and talk about kind of my thoughts through both Amanda and Keith's dialogues. So, for me, I think like strong concept and vision, kind of having a business plan, like 100% very important. You got to have a foundation. You got to know what you want. I think that dovetails with Keith's point of like, is your goal to open a business that's making money because you're trying to turn a profit, or is your goal, you know, a community space or to serve some demonstrated need in the community, or something that you just wish existed? Like, what's the point? Is it an ego thing from within? Are you serving somebody else? Are you trying to gain money? Are you trying to gain power? And knowing that, you know, I think having that be something that you understand and is written down, even if you're the only person who ever looks at it, is very important. Having those conversations with yourself or with your partner. Also, if there are two people, like having that conversation, I think we sometimes forget that it's really important to actually talk about that, especially if it's with somebody like a romantic partner, because you're like, oh, I know you so intimately. Of course, we want the same things. And we forget that unless we sit down and actually write down those bullet points, we might not be on exactly the same page. It doesn't mean our intentions aren't good, but you know, those things might be slightly different. And I think getting comfortable having uncomfortable conversations and very frank conversations, and also being willing to kind of allow our blind spots to be pointed out, or being willing to point out other people's blind spots in a intentional and loving way, is a really great skill to foster early, because you want to get that stuff done. And I think it's easy at the beginning to get really excited about something and not have those kind of more detailed conversations. But I also think that from that perspective, it's so important to remove any blinders and remain really, really open to the realities that are potentially coming our way. Like, for example, a pandemic, or we're suddenly a restaurant when we were intending to be a coffee shop, or vice versa. Or we ended up opening a fine dining restaurant when we thought we were opening a casual neighborhood spot. That's weird. And the idea that so much of our identity as a public facing entity is defined by the way people perceive us, and we can't control that. We can write script, we can put things on Instagram, but people perceive things through their own lens of reality, and we have to be constantly checking in with what that perception is. And if it doesn't match what we think we're putting out into the world, then there's a disconnect. And what do we do about that? And being willing to do something about it. And it's really important to have those moments where you don't have to be checking in all the time. I mean, I think your point, Amanda, about like, does this in line with a coffee shop? I think it could be easy for that to become almost a compulsive thing. And that is useful. But I think there's also a willingness to like allow yourself to stray a bit. And then maybe once a month you have a meeting where you kind of bring it back. And so I think it's kind of that duality. It's like a seesaw of like, you have to allow yourself a little bit of creativity, and you have to allow yourself a little bit of drifting. And then you have to be willing to kind of right the ship in these intentional ways. And I think part of that is also just taking the pressure off of yourself. We're like, we have to learn, we have to stretch, we have to make mistakes. And, oh, sorry, I want to read what that question is. No, I'm not saying be what the customer wants you to be. I'm saying being aware of that vis-a-vis your own wants, and understanding that those are a relationship, because you can put something out into the world, but if nobody else wants that, you're going to have a hard time making any money. And even if making money isn't your only business goal, to do it, unless you are sitting on a pile of cash, you do have to make some money, right? And so there are elements where you have to there has to be an ebb and flow between what you want and what your customer base wants. And part of that can be education, right? You can teach people, hey, this is the thing that you didn't know you wanted. That's really exciting. Let me introduce you to this thing that I love. But also, you know, maybe we're in a more rural environment. We don't have as much just kind of people who have a ton of money to spend. And so I think there has to be a willingness for that pendulum to kind of move, and just kind of keeping in touch with that, being willing and open to change, and checking in with yourself, as well as your team, as well as your partner, as well as your guests. All of those things kind of have to happen. Doesn't mean that that's what happens every single day. No, but maybe once a month, maybe every 6 months, and just kind of having a macro vision check-in against the granular of the day-to-day. And I think that gets also into kind of like the identity of you as an owner, but often in these small businesses, you're also an employee, and understanding the way your role works in the business. And I think we've all probably ended up pigeonholing ourselves into this place where we're not really paying ourselves fully. We're doing 3 jobs, whereas everybody else is doing 1. You know, these are all normal things in a small business. And for me, that's a big one. I wish that from the beginning, I had been a lot more intentional about, this is what my job is, this is what I get paid to do, and I hire other people to do the other things. And I set clear boundaries around what is my skill set and also what is the thing that feeds me, because those might not be the same, right? I mean, the goal is that you're finding something that you love to do that also you're good at, and that's what we hope. And being willing to say, okay, you're better at this thing. Like, I had to be our bookkeeper for the first year. I am neurotic, so I was able to control the finances of the business. I did it in the most inefficient, stressful way possible. What really should have happened is I should have hired a bookkeeper, and I should have been able to have weekly meetings with this person where they understood what my needs were and what my expectations were, but that they were doing the legwork. And that, I think, is something of just understanding, like in my head, I was like, oh, I have to hire servers. I have to prioritize that. And so then I was still serving, but I was also doing all of that, and kind of understanding that I'm just one person. I have to exist in a role, and I have to prioritize the things that seemingly should be the owner's job just as much as the other things. And maybe I'm actually better at serving, and that should be what I'm doing. And I delegate that bookkeeping to somebody else, or I delegate the wine list to somebody else. And being willing to, you know, I think as Amanda and Keith have both said, you know, that delegation, that division of labor is so important. And trusting your instincts. I think that's the other thing, is especially when you have a really small business. And I think that, Amanda, you and I seem like we've had similar experiences of like wanting to be really intentional about the kind of staff energy that we are building and the kind of safety that we are building in a workspace, because I think, having worked in restaurants, as most of us are probably aware, they can be really abusive and really extractive and really manipulative. And I think those of us who've come up working in those environments, when we finally get the chance to do it our own way, we overcorrect. We go to this place of being, I will never be the bad boss. I will never take advantage of anybody. I am going to be only generous. And what ends up happening is the only person you're taking advantage of is yourself and your business. And I think that that's the other thing, is that you can, that's part of these conversations about money and these conversations about expectations and boundaries, following your instincts. If you're hiring friends, like, take off the friend hat and put on the boss hat and say, okay, this is what I need from you. If we're not able to do this, then we can't work together. And that's not a fight. That's not an emotional issue. That is clarity, and that is honesty, and that is mutual respect of, I'm not going to ask you to do something you don't want to do, but I'm also not going to sacrifice my needs in this role. And I think that kind of the comfort, we have to rely on our community and our friends. We've hired so many friends. Some of it has gone very, very poorly. We have lost friends because of that, because we weren't willing to name issues that we were seeing arise, and we were hoping that they would just kind of go away because we all have good intention. And it doesn't work out that way, unfortunately. And so being willing to kind of, whether it's a friend or just an employee or a work relationship, whether it's you and your partner, whether it's you and your, you know, any of your vendors, your distributors, your farmers, clear expectations about what you want and need. And that goes for what you're asking of them, as well as what you're saying you can provide. And I think that that's a really important thing. You can have the intention of saying, I want to pay you $30 an hour, but if realistically that's not going to happen, don't say it. You know, and just kind of setting everybody up for a very clear understanding of what we're participating in is so important. And blah, 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 let's see. I think that's right. The investor thing. Yeah, I mean, I think the capital thing, and this is where maybe Keith, you and I differ a little bit, because I think that, you know, coming up in a traditional restaurant structure, similar to the tipping, right? It's kind of like we've all been taught that this is the way to do it. And I think it is really important to remember that you can do whatever the F you want, to be frank. You know, we live, especially in Maine, where we have a lot of freedom, we have a lot of flexibility, cost of living is a little bit lower. We have this community mentality, we're very DIY. And I think it's really incredible to remember that you don't have to do it a traditional way, but if you're going to not, it is going to be harder. And how do you set up safeguards for yourself so that if it's untenable, if it's not sustainable, how do you protect yourself from getting caught in a net that you then can't get out of? And I think that that's something that, you know, I certainly wish I'd been a little bit more intentional about saying, I need to have this much capital by this amount of time. And if I don't, then we have to take it back to the drawing board, and just kind of setting check-ins for myself, because I made it work, but I made it work by not paying myself or my partner for a year, and by literally rubbing pennies together every single day, maniacally balancing our books. And it wasted a huge amount of my time. And it's not as if we like made money, we just kept it out of the red. And I feel like your point about understanding debt, feeling comfortable, maybe swinging into that a little bit, understanding the ebb and flow of seasonality, checking in with a financial advisor or another business person. You know, there were a lot of ways. I think I was extremely stubborn about wanting to do it not a traditional way, that I forgot that there were some of the things that I tossed out would have been useful tools. And or that I just made it much harder for myself. And so kind of, again, being constantly willing to check yourself, check your plan, and learn, be open, and ask for help. I mean, I think that's another thing, being in Maine, you know, back in Maine, for me, I've noticed that I'm always surprised when I feel like New York City is a little bit more collaborative. And I do feel like community is really strong here, but when you're opening your own business, you're like, no, I'm going to do it myself. I don't need help. Like, I'm good. I got my plan. And there's something really nice about being willing to say, I don't really know how to do this. This isn't really working the way I thought. And like using something like Score, checking in with, you know, a neighbor business, and also fostering that, you know, I think then turning around and giving that, so we can kind of normalize that type of engagement, and not continue to silo ourselves and let ourselves just kind of figure stuff out. And I think some of it maybe stems from embarrassment of like, well, I'm a business owner, I should know how to do this. And it's embarrassing that I don't have a business degree. And maybe, you know, I don't want to admit that to anybody because maybe they won't take me seriously anymore. And I think that, you know, we're all sitting in our dark corner having these thoughts. And if we all started talking about it and sharing, we're all just humans and we're all just trying to do meaningful things in the world, and being willing to kind of name our weaknesses, I think, can only make us stronger and better together. Sorry, that was very roundabout, but thank you.
No, that was great. Yeah, thanks to all three of you. You know, by way of confession, you know, I have a consulting business, do executive coaching, and my wife is my business partner as well. So all the things you kind of mentioned about fumbling and going in one direction, you know, it's finding the balance between what you're passionate about, what you like doing, and what will make money. And sometimes you start off doing something and say, oh, I really want to do that. However, nobody's buying it. So what direction do we go in? And then for all of you, there was the big pivot that you had to make. You know, during COVID, I mean, all three of you were kind of starting up, you know, a new venture of some kind at that point, and you know, COVID hit. So I have lots of questions I could ask, but what I'd like to do is open it up to the, you know, the guests who are here, see what questions they have, and Hannah will be handling this bit. You know, you can put a question in the chat. Hannah will probably ask you to come off, you know, off silence and ask your question of whoever you want to ask.
Yeah, if folks have questions, we can do it either way. You're welcome to type it into the chat and I can read it out, or if you'd like to ask it live, you can either wave around your actual physical hand in front of the camera, or you can raise your virtual hand and I can call on folks to unmute and speak up. Let's see, David, why don't you go for it? Start us off.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to thank both SCORE and the participants, the panel, because this is a fantastic discussion. And I have no background. I mean, I worked as a host in a restaurant once, but I had a vision a few years ago of opening a restaurant, and I needed to find someone that had experience in the industry. And I have a friend in Mexico now who's a restaurateur. So I have, a creative process, and I have an idea for what I want this venture to become. And it sounds like these businesses are like organisms. And my question relates to sort of the startup process, because you guys talked about capital requirements and so on. And it's really about making sure that your vision, whatever it is, becomes something that, the community is benefiting from, your employees are benefiting from, the business is benefiting from, and it's sustainable. So I guess we talked a little bit about business plans at the front, but how did you get to the point, and was there a point in the startup process where the business was sustainable, you had achieved basically a steady client base that was able to support the operations regardless of your finance? And how did you have a plan going in? And I guess this is to all of you. My idea is sort of in line with what Gabriela has been doing in Camden. But were you able to, like, your initial customer base, was it friends? Was your marketing strategy? Was it word of mouth? How did you actually create that dynamic where you had the community engaged in the business and it became sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a duality of word of mouth and just kind of foot advertising. I mean, Midcoast is still, we do physical papers. I put a lot of flyers out. I literally walk around to the farmers markets. It is a lot of kind of hoofing it on foot. And then I think part of it is, the letting go of that first concept that was a little bit more esoteric, and saying, okay, we got to bring it back. This is not what this community wants. We also are open year round, which is rare for a lot of restaurants up here. We are not open just in the summer. And so I had to also be really attentive to, that first kind of more highfalutin concept would have been great in just the summer, but we wanted to be year round. And so given that was part of the priority, we made that pivot. I would say now we're solid. Concept is working. It's incredible. It's night and day from what we were dealing with, even just in kind of in February. But, I think a lot of it, unfortunately, did have to be kind of reactionary and kind of very, just very aware of what the reality was. And I think even just the pandemic, the realities that we've been operating under, all the rules have changed so many times. We started with, only takeout contactless things. And then we went to, there was some vaccination people reading outside, and then we went to normalcy. And then on top of the seasonality. So there's this we've operated in 17 different worlds for the past 2 years. The one thing I will say for use in particular with kind of what you've just outlined, number one, I mean, it's wonderful that you have kind of a point person, a restaurateur in Mexico who's providing you guidance and assistance. Hire a person here, hire a person who knows what they're doing and who will help you. You're the creative, you're the artist. Hire the person who will execute this for you and who knows how to do it. And then also, don't box yourself in. I think even from like a physical space perspective, like this is why I hate booths, because you can't move them. Like try as much as possible to allow yourself flexibility, especially given that this seems like it's a newer endeavor. It's a creative endeavor. It's kind of more conceptual. It's not fully fleshed out. You're trying to figure it out, which is exciting. And that's wonderful. Leave as much open as you can. So like our restaurant, for example, we ripped out all the booths. It's all tables, standalone tables with chairs, because that means that we can rearrange that dining room. I've changed that dining room probably 10 times in the last year. I have changed the layout. I have changed what kinds of tables I'm using. I'm changing how many seats I have, just to see how does it feel? What makes sense for this flow? What makes sense for I thought we were going to get bigger groups. We only get 2 tops. So I needed more 2 tops, and if you have it's just a little harder sometimes to like when you've physically locked the space into a certain reality to be able to make changes. So I think even things like, obviously with your bar, if you have a bar, you're going to want to leave that, but as much as possible, allowing yourself the possibility of like rearranging the order of equipment behind the bar. Maybe that low boy should be over here and the sink should be over here. You know, little things like that, of trying to really allow yourself room to evolve and change, whether it's small or big. But I think that's a big one, is not painting yourself into a cage that then your creativity has to be bound by.
Great. And I know we're coming up on 1 o'clock here. I want to respect people's time. It's fine with me if we go a few minutes over to get some more questions in, but also if any of our attendees or panelists need to leave at 1, then, you know, feel free to do so. I'm going to go next to just one quick question I saw come through in the chat specifically for Keith. How is the Harvest Moon location doing in Newport, as that's a region that has some more poverty than some of the other sites that we've talked about? Do you find, you know, different conditions in some of those different locations you've got?
Yeah, absolutely. Each and with 7 stores, they're all different. Some are in strip mall kind of environment, some are freestanding, and as like someone mentioned, Newport, that's in a very quiet kind of mall area. But the Newport location is what we would consider to be a successful store. It's not our busiest store in terms of sales, but for the amount of sales it does, our percentages are in line, which is important to us. So ultimately, you know, if we can bring a bottom line percentage that's acceptable to us, based on the sales we're doing, then we consider that a good restaurant. You know, I mean, I'd rather get whatever 15% of a much larger number, as long as we're getting enough sales to bring our required percentage, then we're okay. So yeah, that's been an interesting story. It's been it's been received well. We really like doing business there. Does that answer the question okay?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it. Lords, I saw you turn your camera on a couple times now. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
I have so many questions. We started out opening a gelato shop, but we wanted it to be a gelato and bar. We've been in business now since May of 2020, when we were allowed to open. One of my questions was about these percentages that I hear about. This is our first time in a restaurant business. And now we, instead of a gelateria, we really have a full restaurant. We have gelato, we have bar, and we found out that in Maine, to have a bar, you had to have food. So here we go. So we have a full menu. I hear about this 30-30-30, that you should expect to spend 30 on your product, 30 for wages, and then 30. But I'm running a nonprofit essentially. And I wonder, how do you get there? How do you get to this place where you're actually making some money and not running a nonprofit? I mean, it's great. We have 4 employees, sometimes 5, and we're providing employment. The community loves us, but we're not making any money.
I don't know, Keith, do you want to jump in? I feel like that kind of running a tight numbers game is probably.
Did I come across as only being about money? That's not what I was saying.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I have thoughts. I'm happy to talk. But
You know,
You come across as efficient.
look, I love your question. Do you go by Lords? Is that your name?
Lords, yeah.
Lords, yeah, no, I love that question.
That we have,
Gabrielle, I'm itching to answer that question.
I know, I see it.
we have no
I love
loans. I wanted
financial statements, and I'm wondering, have you worked? I would say the way to make money ultimately is to learn to, if you are afraid of numbers and financial statements, they're not complicated math, and they're not that difficult to understand. And I would say if short answer, and I'll leave my email, or maybe someone can put my email up here if you want to talk further, but I would say find a way to familiarize yourself with financials and industry standards, because 30-30-30 really isn't the goal for a lot of restaurants. So without taking up too much time, I would say if you're selling food, what it sounds like you are selling product, if you have a top line, the question is, how do we get it to the bottom line? And there's for lack of a better word, bleeding somewhere from the top to the bottom. You'd have to look carefully at your financial statements to find that bleeding, but it can be done. And I can almost assure you, of any restaurant that's selling food, unless they're getting buried in rent, which I doubt you are,
We own the building.
then the answer's there in the financials, is what I would say. And SCORE can help you with that for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you agree with that? The other restaurateurs? I mean,
Yeah, I think I'll kind of do a little like in kind of softer layman's language. Like for me, you can't always control how much people are spending at your restaurant. You can control what you are spending. And so, you know, the first thing is being able to kind of separate out, what am I spending? And then figuring out, because that will divide out into various things. You've got your, you know, your ingredients that are passed through, you've got your labor, which is fluctuating, and then you've got some of your static costs. And go ahead.
I got to interrupt one thing. You can control what people are spending by raising everything 50 cents.
Sure, true.
So you know that, like that might be
first,
the answer. That could be the answer to all your bottom line problems, is 1,000 items going up by 50 cents. Just
to an extent, but if you don't, but that only works if you don't have your costs. Like if your costs are tight, right? If you understand that your costs are at their proper range, like I think the first step is making sure that your costing is appropriate for what you're trying to run, right? And I think that's where we get into those kind of industry standards and like 30-30-30, you know, and I think that it's good to start with, what are industry standards? And then does it make sense for me once you understand it? But it's the same logic of like, you have to understand the rule before you can break it. And I think that's the first step. And then kind of saying, okay, so like, we can't really tighten anywhere. So then maybe, you know, our costing is actually really good. So then the secondary question is, oh, maybe we do have to raise a smidge. But it's kind of like looking at each of these things and then how do they relate to each other? And how do we, you know, if you're able to bring your cost down a smidge and also raise a smidge, suddenly you're doubling up on income that you're saving. And that's an easy way to do it, as opposed to having to slash costs or having to really raise prices, you know, if you kind of find a Venn diagram of the two. But it does require, you know, intimate understanding of the way your money's flowing, and also what are expected things with regard to how are you costing things. Like, is there a cheaper option for the ingredient you're buying? Like, how do you consolidate income and wage? How do you provide, you know, say value added benefits to your employees as opposed to simply pass through money? Like, there are a lot of ways to diversify the way you're creating a positive work environment and a positive space for your community.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I've got one other question in the chat, and then I see David and Rianne both have virtual hands up. So let's call that our last three questions, just so we don't go all day, even though this is super interesting. The question in the chat was, what is the importance of cash reserves? Does anyone want to comment on that a little more?
Amanda?
Maybe I shouldn't be the one.
No, you learned.
I mean, it's just like and correct me, Keith or Gabriela, but it's just like your personal reserves having a bit of a safety net for the unanticipated things, and especially in a seasonal economy, having that money that's there in the event that you have an extra expense and you're at this point where you're breaking even, or maybe you're in the red and you need just something to help you keep going. Or if there's an unanticipated huge event like a pandemic, that you can keep up with your basic costs to be able to get through those types of times. And it's helped me to think about, you know, we're open year round, and we keep for the most part, all of our employees throughout the year. And we focus a lot on labor, and it's like, I lean into doing more and more front of house during slow times. And I fill in different areas to keep our labor actually as tight as we can. But, you know, thinking about like payroll and those red months and whatnot, it just gives you that little bit of that safety net to be able to focus on other things. And keep you flowing. And we're really lucky, knock on wood, this year we've been in the green all year, and that's been from, honestly, going back to Lourdes, like really focusing on our labor costs. And I mean, the supply chain issues have been so insane, and the cost of foods have been crazy, that I've had to focus in different areas, but like really combing through and like really trying to get the best deal, and thinking about different vendors if it's just not quite working. And I found a lot of wiggle room to be able to make a difference, a noticeable difference for us. So yeah.
Great. Okay, Rhiann, how about you go next if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? You seem to be unmuted, and yet we can't hear you. So I'm not sure if there's an issue with your microphone. But if you want to try typing your question into the chat instead, then I can read it out for you if we're not able to hear you.
Unless he's going to say
Can you
something
hear me
about
now?
me, Hannah, he's a former employee, so.
Ah, we can hear you now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so my question, it goes back to the relationship, and to like, especially my interest is to the employees, because I feel like you gotta have a great relationship between you and your employees. And so my question is like, how do you share that concept and vision you guys have, and what things did you learn along those lines, and keeping them happy and you happy?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Before I try to answer that, did we achieve that at Tacorita at all?
Somewhat.
Somewhat. It's a good on it. No, I appreciate that. I mean, Rihanna and I worked together for quite some time, actually. I was in the kitchen back in those days. And anyway, no, that's a good question. How do you convey your vision and your concept and your goals to the people that work for you? Was the question.
Mhm.
Yes. And how do you keep them happy and you happy?
I'm gonna let the other two panelists answer that. I like to hear their answers as well. So
I mean, I like to think about it as, you know, I think about everything about our business, and especially as like people come in right from the first moment that I respond to someone who's applying to the job, I feel like I'm setting the tone very much so at that point as to who I am and what our business is about. So really setting the expectations as clearly as possible from the beginning. And I've made the mistake of maybe not being as clear as I could be. And then people come in thinking that maybe there's different opportunities that actually aren't necessarily available in the timeline that they want. And I think it's just being very clear upfront about what it is that we're doing together and this partnership that we're coming in together for, and what our culture is about. And the culture, you know, I can talk about it and I can tell people about it, but when they get there, it has to match the words that I'm telling them. So it's all about how we train people. It's the materials that we have. It's our employee handbook, which we finally got an employee handbook, which is insane. We've been, you know, open for 3.5 years, but it's one of those things when you're surviving, but it's so important to have these things that are not only how you create it, but the pieces that people can go to and say, okay, I understand, this all kind of works together. And if I say something, I have to follow through with it. I mean, that's how you build trust, right? And I think that it's all those different pieces. And I don't know if it's as much about making myself happy and making the employee happy. It's how are we creating a safe environment in which we can come to each other when there's issues that arise, and that we both know that we're going to be able to figure that out, and we trust each other that you know, as me as the owner and the manager, that I'm going to be able to resolve issues effectively and people are going to feel heard. And then I know that when I come to people that they're also going to listen and they're going to be able to tell me, you know, for example, if someone's feeling burnt out on the job, I might not have any idea unless they are telling me this, until it gets to a point where they might explode because they're burnt out. So how do we create these just the communication, the lines of communication that are positive, and you know, maybe it's not about everyone being happy, but everyone feeling heard, and being able to work through things. And that is not an easy thing. I think that's one of the hardest parts of the job that I spend so much time on, because it's so important. And I don't always get it right, but I think that it's building on that and making sure that your business feels that way when you come in for people.
Yeah, I think this is a really hard thing to do. And I'd love the opportunity. I know we're running over, but this I think is incredibly important, especially in kind of this day and age. We're coming out of the pandemic. I think everybody's feeling a little bit like, who am I? Like, how am I fulfilled? Like, I want to be sure I'm, I'm taking care of myself and I'm being fulfilled and getting paid well. And, there was that kind of like big overhaul of the restaurant industry and people raising minimum wage and changing our boundaries about working overtime and all of those things, and I think that's really incredible. I also think, and I'm saying this not as a restaurant owner but as a person who has been an employee for the majority of my time in this industry, and this is maybe a little unpopular and I'm just going to say it, it's not really always about you. And I think that's a really big thing that all of us need to remember, like as owners, as employees, as customers across the board, we all exist in this little reality where like we are the center of our own universe. And it's kind of like, I want my vision. I want to be happy. I want to be able to get my suggestion put on the menu. And like, when you are going to a job, especially if it's not a worker owned cooperative, and there's a difference there, right? Like if it is a collective environment and if it is worker owned, or if that's where you're working towards, that's one thing, right? Because then that's democratic decision making. There is a clear understanding that everybody gets input and there's a structure in place for that. But if there isn't, then that means, bye Keith, then that means that there is unfortunately somebody who's put an incredible amount of thought and vision and money and time into a thing. And as an employee, you are hired to help them execute that thing. Does that mean that your wants and needs get sacrificed? Absolutely not. But does that mean that you get equal say in participating in vision creation? Not necessarily. If they want that and if that's the environment that they're fostering, that's really wonderful. But I think that it needs to be understood from the get-go that if that's something you're seeking, is that also something that they're offering? Because that might not be the case. And I think that there are ways of being fulfilled. I think Amanda commented on like, what is happiness versus what is fulfillment versus what is like, we are just working on a collective goal. And I think kind of understanding, for you, the same way we're talking about like, what's the goal for opening a business? It's also, if you're an employee, what's your goal for participating in a business? Is it a job for you to make money? Is it an opportunity for you to learn because you want to open your own business? Or is it something that you really want to participate in the vision and creation of? Because those three are very different, and you're going to interact with that business and that owner, that employer, very differently in those three scenarios. And so I think being able to, both from the employer perspective and from the employee perspective, be very clear about your wants and needs. So like one of my goals in my business, like this place is my vision. I don't necessarily share that. I like input. I think I always want input, but myself and my partner always make the ultimate decision. And if that person then is unhappy with that decision, then we have an issue. That's an impasse, right? And we have to say, okay, there's something else going on. Now, on the flip side, one of the things that I love to do is teach skill set making. And so like, if I know that ultimately you want to open your own business, I'm going to pull you in when I'm doing inventory. I'm going to pull you in when I run payroll. I'm going to pull you in and teach you how to build a spreadsheet to track tipping. I'm going to tell you how to do costing. Like, I'm going to be handing you educational materials so that you can be gaining from my knowledge and from what I've already gained. That's different than being an active driver and participant in my business. That's handing you education and that's allowing you to be a participant. And maybe, you'll see something that I don't. Maybe we'll get to a point where we want to share and you end up growing in my business, but that doesn't necessarily start that way. And I think kind of understanding that ebb and flow. And if it seems like you want something that you're not getting, how do you communicate that? And then how are you okay if you don't get it? That's I think a big one too.
Gabriela, I just wanted to say really quickly, I think that's a great point that you make about finding out, as an employer, finding out what your employees are passionate about, or areas, like really checking in with them regularly about areas of growth and what are some goals and things like that. Because not only is it, you want to help them reach those goals and they'll feel more fulfilled when they're there, but also, like you said, like they can then become a different type of valuable asset, like
Yep.
to the company, and be able
100%.
to add value to the company in areas that you maybe didn't realize that, you know, it's great. I have employees now doing all sorts of different things because these are their personal interests, and it's amazing. It's things that I don't have to do, and they love doing it, and so they do it better than I could ever do it for the company. So
Right.
that's
And I think that goes both ways, right? Like not
Yeah.
all of us have the opportunity to work for an employer that is going to take it upon themselves to sit down and ask all of their employees, what do you want out of this? You know, that is not a traditional structure in a restaurant. We've all been that employee, and normally we're just a cog that gets plugged into the machine and it's like, shut up and do your job. And so, you know, that isn't the norm. I think that that's part of also like gumption of like, if you're an employee and you want more, you know, don't say something passive aggressively during the shift. Send your manager or your boss an email and say, hey, I would like to be more of a participant in this particular section of the restaurant. Is there a way for me to learn from you? Is there a way for me to take on more responsibility? And then if they say no, you're in this moment of saying, okay, this might not be the place. Like, I love this restaurant conceptually, but they're not able or willing to give me growth opportunities. So then I have to make a choice. Do I want to stay, rather than being like a personal issue where I get mad about it? It's like, maybe this, if that's something I want out of my job, this isn't the right job for me. And that's okay, you know? And so then how do you you know, we don't all have the luxury of just switching jobs. So how do you say, okay, I'm not getting that, I have to treat this way. How do I seek that from somewhere else? Is there another person on staff who knows more, who's willing to teach me outside of the job? You know, how do I create these structures for myself, as opposed to just kind of wanting them to be handed to me if it's clear that my boss isn't on the same page? And that's hard. It's a moving target for sure.
All right, we do have to wrap up. David, did you have a last comment or question, or you want to take us home here?
I'll do both. One is, so as an executive coach, I've worked with restaurants and worked with all kinds of organizations, and getting to what both Amanda and Gabriela are saying, a useful thing to have is a kind of code of professional conduct that's written by the owner. You know, we're going to talk directly to each other. You know, we're going to do whatever, that we're going to work together as a team. We're not going to talk about, we're going to address issues directly with my manager or with the boss or whatever. You know, we'll provide, you know, growth opportunities whenever we can, you know, so to write something like that. And, you know, you can always email me, and, you know, I can give you an example as a starting place. But it's a good way of defining the culture that you want. And if you want your employees or your managers to add to it, you can do that as well. See it as an iterative process. So I'll just add that for anybody like Lourdes or anyone else who has a business problem, whether it's a restaurant or a food business or any small business, SCORE is here to help. It's confidential. It's, you know, there's often whatever you want. We have subject matter experts as well as generalists, and we're happy to help. And I'll throw it back to Hannah to switch us off.
Excellent. Well, just thank you again to our panelists. And yeah, Keith, as you may have seen in the chat, had to jump off for another meeting. Especially thank you for going well over our time, but I think it was a great discussion. And I'll be sending out an email to everyone on the registration list with the recording and with the resources that were in the chat. So Gabriela and Keith both shared their email addresses. We'll have info for how you can get in touch with SCORE. So hopefully y'all can continue to follow up with questions and keep working together. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.